Hi everyone. This is Srishti from India Currents. Uh, I'm very bad at starting lives, so I'm trying to start this live better than I normally do. So we'll be talking about gender identity today. I'm waiting for Yashu to join our Instagram live. So let's see what happens. But of course, subscribe to India.Currents if you don't already do. Subscribe to the Yashu Rao if you get a chance. I mean, gender identity is such a broad topic. I think we're hitting a lot of things when we talk about sexuality. We go through them pretty quickly, and I hope this session or this live is helpful. It kind of gets you understanding what gender identity means and what that means in the context of being South Asian. So, in South Asian culture, gender identity isn't something we talk about as often. So I'm really, really excited to hear what Yeshu has to say. And also to just like, because we're on two different coasts, like, what are we seeing? I'm in the Bay Area, which is supposedly more liberal, and Yeshu is in Florida, and I can't really speak to their beliefs and where she is specifically, but on the whole, they vote kind of conservative. So I'm actually interested to know, like, what is she seeing in terms of gender identity and gender fluidity and gender expression in Florida. I think I invited Yeshu. Let's try again. Yay!
Hey, how are you?
Hey! I'm good. How are you?
I'm
Ooh, cute.
good. Oh, thank you. How's everything going? Hey, everybody. Did you get my comment in here? Okay, I'm gonna send it again so we can get it pinned. But hey everyone, welcome to Desi Talk. Hi, Srishti.
Hey! So today we're talking about gender identity. I kind of started because I'm very bad at lives and I will spend like 5 minutes just trying to start it. So this time I just tried to say hi to everybody and talk a little bit about the topic we're going to talk about, which is gender identity in Desi context. What does that mean? But also, like, on a global scale, what does that mean? So I'm actually really, really excited. And I talked a little bit about how you're in Florida and I'm in California. So what does it mean for both of us being in such different spaces? So yeah, you're
Absolutely.
welcome to start.
Yeah, for sure. Again, welcome everyone. My name is Yashu Rao. I'm a plus model and confidence coach, founder of #HappyYashu. And this is Desi Talk with India.Currents. Y'all need to follow India Currents. We have got our amazing co-host.
Oh, problems or Srishti. You can follow me as problems.
Perfect. And today, like she said, we're talking about gender identity. And I think the first thing that we need to do is identify genders, identify gender terminology. I think that is one of the most important things that we need to do. We need to provide context and we need to provide the correct terminology because it is so important that we are giving people their due respect. We're allowing people to be who they are and to identify people the way they want to be identified. And that's so important because say somebody comes out, this is a bad example, but just to show you guys a metaphor, right? Because people say, well, what's the big deal? Well, it's like saying, like, if my name is Yashu, but if people keep calling me John, right? I'm not going to feel addressed or represented, right? If
Hmm.
someone doesn't call, like, if someone sees me and says, oh, you're Mexican, I say, no, I'm not. I'm Indian. Why is it important to me identify? Because it's what makes me me. So
Hmm.
similarly, gender identity, it's your identity. So it's important that you represent it, that you're vocalizing it, and that other people are respecting it and giving you that respect, right? That giving you that option to be who you are, especially in this day and age, right?
Hmm.
And so for me, I think this is a great episode that we've got for you guys on Desi Talk. And we're just going to literally go down the list and we're going to define these terms for you guys. And then we're going to dive in a little bit about
sometimes there is no name or term or whatever. And those terms are changing as time goes on, right? Like what I knew 10 years ago to be the terms, now there's like 500 more terms to explain the same thing. So, or to explain different versions of that thing. So I don't want you to feel like what we're saying is the end all be all. It's not. Of course, if you have any questions about any gender identities, please put them in the chat and we'll try to address that. But yeah, we are looking at a glossary of general definitions for LGBTQIA related terms. And yeah, so I can start with the first one, Yashu. The first one is an ally. What does being an ally mean? An ally is someone who confronts heterosexism, sexism, homophobia, phobia, transphobia, heterosexual privilege, not only in themselves, but is checking other people in the world and supporting the LGBTQIA plus community. So that is what being an ally is. You don't necessarily have to identify with any of these terms, but if you are an ally, you're out there, you're like supporting inclusivity, and that's what that means.
Absolutely. And I keep looking up here because my cat is being super ultra cute right now. But
aww, so cute. Hey! What gender is your cat?
I think he's asexual. Not sure.
Yeah, probably.
But he was being super cute. But anyway, sorry, I digress. Coming back here, the next term, which in fact is asexuality. We're going to define asexuality. Asexuality, generally characterized by not feeling sexual attraction or a desire for partnered sexuality. Asexuality is distinct from celibacy, which is deliberate abstention, I'm sorry guys, from sexual activity. So asexuality, again, just to kind of bring that into more like layman terms, I guess, in a certain way, is for someone who doesn't have a desire to participate not only in sexual practices, but also in the whole process of feeling attracted to someone or wanting to be with someone in a sexual experience, right?
Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't like romance. So they can be, asexual people can be in partnered relationships, but don't necessarily engage in sexual activity. So that's a huge, qualifier. That's interesting. That's a different way to, be with another person. I think that's cool.
Right. So asexuality is purely in the sexual standpoint. So romance, partnership, companionship are different because that's more to do with basically not involving your body necessarily, right? So it's more a form of intimacy as we define it. And I think the cat, to a certain extent, is kind of a good example. My cat is, for example, neutered, and because he's neutered, he doesn't have sexual emotions, so he doesn't get attracted. He doesn't have sexual urges. Now, you don't have to be neutered or spayed as humans. We don't have to have that to be asexual, but that's kind of that metaphor or parallel there. So that's what asexuality means. But yeah, next word.
So the next word is, we'll go through biphobia and being bisexual. So biphobia, any phobia is a phobia of people who are bi, pan, and omnisexual, and we'll go through those terms soon. But being bisexual is someone who primarily feels sexual desires towards men and women. Now that's like two binaries, so it can be that you feel one way, you feel for both of those sexes or genders or people who identify that way, whatever, the terms are so difficult because it does kind of, something that I feel like Yashu was trying to hit on is that you could identify with more than one thing. So you could feel male and then be, you could say that, you could have been born, with female reproductive organs, feel male, and then feel a certain way towards women, and then you might be hetero, trans, I believe. I don't want to be wrong. But anyways, either what it is like it's so many elements to how people identify, so we have to be very like cognizant of it and be appreciative of it. And I personally will admit that sometimes it's even hard for me to like remember. It's not because I'm not being appreciative, but it's hard to remember all the different facets of it and all you can do is try to learn and grow from those experiences. So that being
Absolutely.
said, yeah.
I think it's so important that if you identify a certain way, do not be afraid to address it. Do not be
Hmm.
afraid to say, oh, listen, I'm not this, I'm that. Do not be afraid to say, as just as an example, like, how long have you been, on the market for men? Oh, well, I'm not on the market for just men. I'm also on the market for women as well, because for example, I am bisexual. So vocalizing that, right? That healthy communication. There's nothing wrong in expressing that if you are a person who's open to coming out. Now, we have a lot of people who are still confused, right? This term
Hmm.
confused, are still trying to figure it out. They're starting to identify. They don't know. I feel like big part of us, like especially puberty and learning, first couple of years of like high school and college, even people are still experimenting. They like, well, I wonder, like, am I lesbian? Am I bisexual? Let me try kissing a girl. Let me just see what it feels like. And then you call your best friend and you kiss her and you go, oh, okay, that wasn't for me. Or I actually didn't mind that so much, All right.
Hmm.
Um, but being able to be fluid in your mind, as well as communicating and allowing that communication to happen, and expanding your mind, being open to what
Hmm.
people have to say is something you can do as the other person, the person who's listening, right? No
Hmm.
judgment. Allow them to express themselves. You create a safe space for people to express themselves. It's, hey, I'm confused. I don't know what I am. Being respectful of that. Oh, okay, well, what are you doing, to help you realize, what you identify? Be a resource, more than, being like, what? Like, rather than being one of those.
Right. And I think sometimes like you might even identify as one of these things and make those mistakes. And I want you to be forgiving to yourself and also to just like move again forward. And I'm saying that from experience. So I'm just saying always be willing to learn more. And again, these terms will change. Like in another 10 years, these terms will not be the same terms. And there will be young people telling us, hey, there's these other terms that potentially could mean all these other things, and that's fine. Like that's okay. That's literally happened to me and I'm not even that old. I have high school, middle school kids telling me something totally, like talking about their sexuality, talking about who they are sexually as middle schoolers, which to me was very interesting because as a middle school I didn't even think about it. I was just doing the motions, like going through school, doing whatever. And these kids are thinking deeply about like who they are, how do they feel, and like, it's funny to,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's just crazy to think about. They can identify like I feel right now that I'm asexual, this, or and I literally had kids in middle school tell me that, and I was like, how could they possibly know that, when they're like they haven't even hit puberty yet. But the thing is, who cares? Really, who cares whether or not they've hit puberty yet? If they identify as that at that time and then that identity changes over time, all of our identities change over time. So I can't be mad. But this is just my internal dialogue. We can move forward. Sorry.
And once we're done defining the words, what I definitely want to dive into is what are the conversations happening in your Desi
Hmm.
household? For all of our viewers, for people who might be identifying as something, on this list that we are going over right now, how are those conversations happening at your house? Like, are your parents open to it? If they're not, like, what are strategies? And that's where Desi Talk comes into great play, because we're here to help you guys have those uncomfortable conversations. It is a lot, and I'll talk about my personal experience. I am a single straight woman, but at the same time, I always kind of like I like to pull my mom's leg a little bit sometimes. I'm like, well, mom, you have to have an open mind. Like, imagine if I have a son and he turns out to be gay or bisexual, and to hear what their reactions are and then where they're coming from too. So, but we'll get into that shortly. Let's just quickly go down this list, just define them, so that we can have that conversation as well. So I'll go
Hmm.
next. Next term is coming out. Refers to voluntarily. That's the important part.
Hmm.
Voluntarily
Yes.
making public one's sexual orientation and or gender identity. Do you want to do the next one?
Sure, yeah, I'll be real quick. Cisgender just means that you're It's a term to call attention to the privilege of people who are not transgender. Prefix cis means on the side of and not across. So you are usually cis is like straight, cis, straight. I don't know if you want to add to that, but generally that's how cisgender is used. Yeah.
Gotcha. I always get confused with the cis terminology, so that's definitely one. And I'm not afraid to say it, right? Like I get confused. Like, what does that mean? How do I use that? You know. So don't be afraid to ask. Definitely ask someone. And if someone knows how to explain it really well, go ahead and drop it in the comments below. We'd love to hear it.
So it's I think mainly it's if you identify as male and then you portray yourself as male and then you're also heterosexual. You'll say I'm cis hetero, or so I'm cis homo.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I would be cis hetero.
Exactly. So cis and trans is the prefix that's changing. So cis will just be like if you're identifying as whatever and you're portraying yourself as that, then that is cis. So that's what. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Next one.
The next word is cross-dresser, and I'll also do drag king and drag queen because they all kind of come into the same area. So cross-dresser, a word to describe someone who dresses at least partially as a member of a gender other than their assigned sex, carries no implication of sexual orientation. Now, one question that kind of comes in here is, oh, well, girls wear suits and girls wear pants. Are they cross-dressing? I think it's more important to address like the structure of the clothing. It kind of then dives into, you know, what is the type of clothing that they're wearing.
I think we should make one differentiation before you keep going. Is that so this is what I was kind of trying to say before, is sexual orientation versus your gender identity are kind of two separate things. So what you're attracted to sexually is your sexual orientation, and your gender identity is maybe where you fall on the spectrum of how you present yourself to the world. So in terms of cross-dresser, they're saying specifically that it has like nothing to do with your sexual orientation, but it has a lot to do with just how you want the world to perceive you. So that's it. And then I think the next two you can take.
For sure. And that actually, you know, gives me a question, which I'd love for people to drop in the comments below. But for example, wearing jewelry or painting nails, fingernails, does that fall under cross-dressing? What do you guys think? Like if you get your nails painted, we would like to know what you guys think. Go ahead and drop in the comments below if you consider that cross-dressing or not, and maybe we'll be able to kind of dive into that a little bit later. But
I also think. Sorry, Yashu. I also think cross-dressing is kind of a more antiquated term, and I don't think, like, with knowing gender is so fluid and people are, like, going through a lot of different things, I don't even know. I have not heard cross-dresser be used in a really long time. I think it might be for, like, an older generation to, like, again, like, because, you know, like, I'm sure 10 years later we're going to be like, oh, like, I didn't know that term. We use this other term. So maybe it's for, like, an older generation of people who identify with that term. I just wonder. So anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. No, for sure. And I think that's a very important thing to address. That again and again, we're telling you guys these words are evolving. They're evolving because we're actually having better definitions. We're having better clarity. We're being able to distinguish into more categories. So we're breaking it down even more through the years. So don't, you know, so if you think that, I agree, like, you know, we might be able to better define cross-dressing into maybe being gender fluid, or just take it for what it is actually defined as here, you know, and say, oh, okay, well, this person is a cross-dresser, as an example. But drag king, a person, often a woman, who appears as a man, generally in reference to an act or a performance. This has no implications regarding gender identity. And the drag queen is the reciprocal of that, a person, often a man, who appears as a woman, generally in reference to an act or performance. This has no implications regarding gender identity. So just as an example, right, if we look at like ancient Indian dance forms, right, like for example, kuchipudi, men used to dress up as women, and women actually were not even allowed to dance. Men were the only people who can perform the act of women when it came to those dance forms and styles and plays. So Is that an example of a drag king or a drag, I mean, well, I guess a drag queen, right? I think it has very specific nature. Like drag queen is a very specific industry. Even we can say it's a very specific form of an art. So you have to be very careful, like, you know, how that word is being used, because we've also got, for example, again, we went back up and we were saying how, you know, we've got cross-dresser, we've got people who dress certain ways, we've got tomboys, you know, who might be wearing more boyish clothing. Like, you have to be very careful about how these words are being used. But next word.
Yeah, let's go through a few quickly. So this conversation isn't just us going through a bunch of terms. But let's see. So gay is having a sexual orientation towards people of the same gender. So depending on how you identify with your gender, you would be attracted to the same gender. Gender expression is how one, expresses themselves, whether that's masculine or feminine. Gender queer is someone who falls outside of the dominant societal norms of their assigned sex, and it's beyond genders. It's maybe some combination of them. So those are three. I want to say, like, when you were talking about classical dance, I'm really glad that actually you brought it up, because I believe you did Bharatanatyam and I did Kathak, or maybe you didn't do, or Kuchipudi. Sorry, you did Kuchipudi. So you actually did Kuchipudi. Sorry, and I did Kathak. And so there's this term that they use. I believe it's Sanskrit in at least in Kathak, which is called Ardhanarishwara, and it's about being both male and female, and that's been part of our dance. Kathak was not in the same way appropriated by women the way that your Kuchipudi was, but it's always been danced by women. But the thing about Ardhanarishwara is women were portraying men, women were portraying women, women were portraying everything, right? They're taking Shiva, they're taking Durga, they're taking everything. So the aspect of being both male and female and expressing like kind of a gender fluid person has been part of the, Indian literature. It's been part of Indian mythology. It's been part of Indian culture. And it's interesting to think about, like, that's not something that's part of their vernacular now. So I just like to think about it because I like to do, I'm very, like, in Kathak I get to do it. So I always love thinking about it. Anyways, we could keep going.
And we see a lot of references of these things. Even if we look through, for example, like Hindu literature, we see, the union of Shiva and Vishnu, who are supposedly male gods, is, a particular god, maybe Ayyappa, right? And then we'll see the union of, some other, people is something else. So we see these references throughout our literature here and there, but understanding like what that means and what it's trying to represent and the respect that we have to be giving out is, I think, the bottom line, no matter what. Mm-hmm. So just to quickly go over the next couple of words, heterosexism, heterosexuality is a sexual orientation in which a person feels physically and emotionally attracted to people of a gender other than their own. So, for example, a man being attracted to a woman, right? So that's heterosexuality, and heterosexism excludes the needs, concerns, and life experiences of lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer people, while it gives advantages to heterosexual people. It is a subtle form of oppression which reinforces realities of silence and invisibility. Homophobia, the irrational hatred and fear of LGBTQA people. And, we've heard this term multiple times. We've seen it. And I understand that every time there's that word phobia attached to it, people have this thing like, oh no, but like I'm scared of it, versus being disrespectful or something like that. Like and that's why I really don't like to use the word like homophobic, because what are you really trying to say? So it's very important that you're clarifying for yourself what it is that you're identifying, right? Homosexual and homosexuality. And it's funny, as you can see here, Srishti, it says an outdated term. I find that so interesting. It says an outdated term to describe a sexual orientation in which a person feels physically or emotionally attracted to the same gender. So just seeing that, right? Outdated term, like these terms are evolving day by day by day, generation after generation. So being on top of it, and of course being tuned in to Desi Talk right here, where we're defining these words for you guys. We're going to go ahead and jump in a little bit to understanding, of course, the acronym LGBT, which is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. And then we're going to go ahead and define pansexual and omnisexual. Do you want to define those for us, Srishti?
Sure. We do want to talk about intersex for a second, because it's about people who potentially have other organs at birth, and it could lead to a lot of identity issues, because a lot of times whatever the dominant organ is at birth, and this happens often, it will be removed by the doctor. So like, no, the non-dominant organ will be removed by the doctor. So you'll have one more dominant one, and that one will stay and the other one will go. So you could potentially not fit into any identity, not knowing that there's a reason. That's not a reason for it, but that potentially that could be a contributing factor. Okay, so lesbians are women who are attracted to other women, so who identify as women, are sexually attracted to other women. Pansexual, omnisexual are terms used to define people who have romantic, sexual, or desire towards people of all gender and sexes. Non-binary is when you don't necessarily identify with either gender binary, so male or female. Queer can include, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intersex, asexual, so that's what LGBTQIA stands for, but it can go beyond that for whatever people feel they are. We want to make queer super inclusive. It's it can be encompassing of anything. And let's keep going. So just to be very clear, transgender is somebody whose gender identity may not fit with their sexual assigned birth. So they're a sexual organ that they're given at birth. So you don't have to have a sexual change or anything to be transgender. You might just feel you were born a woman, but you have male parts, and that's just what it is. And they might not even be binary. So I want to put that out there. Transsex may be somebody who actually changes their sexual organs to fit whatever sexual orientation or gender identity they feel is theirs. And I don't even want to go into transvestite, because that's not a term that is used anymore. It's very historical. It's not a term that people use, but it was one that used to be used in conjunction with crossdresser. So that's kind of the terms. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. We can, of course, answer them. But I hope that was comprehensive. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I want to say here, when you talked about transgender and transsexual, I definitely want to talk about, kind of current events, and just talking about, like, for example, laws, transgender laws that are out there right now. Just to mention, for example, I read an article that was published in 2019 in India, and there was of course, a transgender law that was passed. So that's definitely a win. Okay, that's definitely a win. It was the first time that really seeing this kind of movement in India. However, was this really a win? It was found that, like, as people started to kind of really read into the law and how you can officiate and state your transgender, right? It was found that it was kind of like a two-part process. Like, you can get a certificate, saying, hey, listen, like, this is now my gender, and this is the name that I want to go by, or whatever, right? You get a new certificate. But then there's like a part two to the certificate. And let me back up one here. That first certificate you have to get from the legislation in the state or district you're living in. And then zoom out one more, you got the secondary document. But in the secondary document, you have to provide medical surgical documentation in order to be officiated as transgender, which just blew my mind, because transgender, the term itself, the definition, it does not necessarily mean you have to go through surgery or any type of treatment, right? Or any type of physical change. It's a state of mind, or it's an identity. So to see that this law had this kind of like two-part to it was really, in a sense, discouraging and also misleading, because you have to remember, right? There's so many people who might be identifying this way, but can they afford the surgery? Hell, do they even want to get the surgery, right? Like that's
Yeah,
super
yeah.
important. Like, do they even want to go through with it? And that, of course, people go through therapy and stuff. Therapy, is that something being offered in India the way it needs to be offered to people, of all different socioeconomic classes, right?
Mhm.
So considering all of these things, right? Here in the US, for example, if you are in the process of changing your identity, going from transgender to actually transsexual, which you're, changing your physical gender identity, right? You have to go through therapy. You have to get clearance from a therapist. You have, like, if you go to the surgeon, they will literally make you, they have a curriculum that you have to
Mhm.
follow through with before you can actually get that procedure done.
Mhm.
So here in the US, we have a sense of kind of like protecting the person, making sure this is what they want to do, because it's an irreversible process in some cases, right? So for me to just see, this article that I had read, it was really kind of upsetting, like we're making progress, but no, we're not. So it was just something interesting that I wanted to share with you guys. But coming back to what we were talking about, the question that I wanted to ask, remember I asked it above earlier, how are you having these conversations in your Desi households? How many of you guys feel like it would be a really big issue to vocalize, like, hey mom, I'm queer, like, hey mom, I'm asexual, or hey mom, I don't want to get married to this guy that you're bringing me because I'm a lesbian, right? How are you having these conversations? It's so
Mhm.
important in this day and age, and that's why I'm so happy to see so many influencers, desi influencers out there, who are sharing their story and talking about how they're having these conversations. But Srishti, in your opinion, what do you think would be a healthy way of having this conversation? And do you think that in certain households it's even a conversation to be had, or it's just one of those things that you just can't?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I personally don't I identify as I mean I'm perceived as a girl, which is fine. I identify as non-binary. But I don't ask people to use they pronouns because I think I'm okay with presenting as female at this point in my life. And then also I am pansexual, so that's not necessarily something that falls in line with being straight. So it's if you're asking if I had that conversation with my parents at home, no, not really. I think growing up there were indicators that I wasn't, like didn't always wear I didn't ever want to wear dresses. I didn't really want to do super girly things. I always wanted to, like, I asked my mom if I could do Taekwondo as a 3-year-old, and they actually put me in it, which is crazy. And then I got a black belt. But like, I did things like I was, whatever is perceived as masculine. I did a lot of masculine things. I felt very masculine. And in some ways I still feel very feminine, which is why I'm like there's this thing where I feel very gender fluid, which is why it's fine for me to be perceived as a she, but I personally don't identify with a she. And I think something that you said at the very beginning that really struck a chord with me was that you said it's how you interact with the world, it's part of you, and it's like how you identify. And I do not identify. I do not feel very woman, and that has nothing to do with what other people are doing or what other how I should. It's just I don't feel like I identify with feminine traits specifically. So in that way, I find myself like kind of flailing in the world, like where do I fit in? And I think for a very long time, I didn't even understand my sexuality because I didn't understand my gender identity. And I think those two go so hand in hand with who you are. So, yeah, I don't know. Like, I think my parents I think parents like to be ignorant of whatever they don't have to confront, right? And I think I've said a lot of times, like you have, I would say, like, what if I'm gay? Like, what are you going to do? And my mom would get really frustrated and upset. But my dad was actually like, I don't know. Like, I don't really feel like I would care that much. So it's interesting to hear, like, my mom, I'm sure, would still love me and would have to deal with it from how I feel like she interacts with me. But having that specific conversation about like, this is me, I am non-binary, this is me, I am pansexual. A lot of what I do can fall into very traditional norms because again, being gender fluid, being sexually like that being also fluid, it doesn't really have to box you in. So I have not had to address it in the ways that they want, you normally would. But that said, you totally should. If you are feeling like that's an urgent thing that you need to address with your parents, you absolutely should address it. I'm saying from my personal experience, it's just been something that it's not even that I prefer not to, it's just something that I don't think that I just do whatever I want anyway. So it's like I live my life as a non-binary pan person, and in the world, I interact with the world in that way. And if other people aren't perceiving me that way, that's on them. And like, I will always project myself in the way that I want. So that's kind of how I feel about that question.
Absolutely. And I think that's beautiful. Like, it's beautiful that you are just going to be you. You do you, boo. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
You do you. But I also can understand, like, from the other perspective, like imagining, like, I feel like I've had this conversation with someone before too, where they're like, I'm from a very strict Orthodox family. Like, are you kidding me? I could never tell them that I'm seeing a guy or I'm seeing a girl or whatever, right? And I think in those moments, as a person on the external side, all I can say is, what is it that makes you happy, right? What is it that makes you complete? If this is who you identify with, why are you going to go through with this marriage or this, what your parents are trying to set you up with? Because you're only going to make life even more complicated, right? So if you feel like it's not something you can have a healthy conversation, and that's why if you guys haven't checked out my article, Healthy Conversations in Our Desi Households, be sure to check that article out. It was in India Currents. You can go to, I can't talk today. You can go to
Same.
as well as my link bio, and you can check out the article there. But having those healthy conversations and boundaries and letting people know, listen, I need to tell you guys something, which is something you're not going to be comfortable with, but it's important I address it because there's no other way we can go about it. And then vocalizing, like, listen, I am, and then whatever your identity is, right? I am this. This will impact me and us or you in this way, and then
if it's impeding on your happiness and how you live your life, it's definitely something that you need to talk to your parents about. If they can't accept that, honestly, it's not worth it. Like, I know it sounds horrible because your family is your life. I'm very connected to my family, but the thing is, at the end of the day, you're going to live your life. And if you're unhappy for most of it, that's not fair to you. Like, you shouldn't be sitting there thinking about like, oh, my parents will be so mad at me if I come out as gay or bi or whatever. Like, you should live your life in the ways that make you happy. And whether that's actually not having the conversation and being discreet or like having that conversation, being very open, I think that is such a spectrum. Like, and it really is dependent on like the kind of parents that you have. That said, I'm openly saying this on a live, so it's not like I'm hiding. Again, I've told you this, I'm never hiding anything from my parents. I just think they're just, whatever they want to accept, they'll accept at some point, and I think they'll come to terms with it. So if your parents...
My family, it's a completely different dialogue, right? And I think a lot of you guys can relate to this. Drop in the comments, let us know if you guys can relate to this, if you're, especially in a Desi household. If I went to my mom and I said, like I said, the example, right? I said, Mom, like, what are you going to do? Like, say I have a son and he turns out to be gay or lesbian. I have a son who's a daughter who might be lesbian. Or, Mom, like, what are you going to do if, I have a kid who's queer? Like, what are you going to do? And the fact that their reaction is like, please do not say stuff like that.
Oh yeah, it's the same exact same conversation.
It happens in the Desi households. But then as me, as a woman, as maybe who's going to be a mom, like, or who is a mom, right, at this point of time, how will I react? You know, what can I do? And I think that's where tapping into your resources, looking at influencers. One thing that I really respect, for example, is Lily Singh, right? Superwoman. So if you look at her, she's come out as, I believe, bisexual, if I'm not
Bisexual,
mistaken.
yeah. Hmm.
You know, and then also, you know, not probing, I'm sorry, like, but asking the right questions, right? Even to influencers, like, how did you, you know, go about this in your family? The purpose of influencers is to give you insight on these topics, right? So
Hmm.
being able to tap in, checking out their healthy ways of communication is super important. And so for
Yeah.
me and my family, if this situation ever were to come, I would say my child's happiness is the most important thing to me.
Yep.
And I understand that this might not be something I'm comfortable with. It's okay if you're not comfortable. Listen, it's okay if you're not comfortable. If someone comes out to you and is like, oh, by the way, I'm this, and you're like, whoa, I did not see that coming. It's okay to not be comfortable, but do not be judgmental or rude or disrespectful,
Hmm.
right? Give yourself time to process because it can be a lot. It's a lot on that person, imagine, right? So it's definitely going to be a lot. It can be a lot, but then again, that's why this kind of education is important. It's important to address. Um,
Yep.
and I think that is the most important thing. And then another side to this that I really quickly want to brush upon, and I know we're a little bit over time, so we're going to wrap up right after this, but also just talking about that evolution, right? Like where we don't know who we are. I remember in college, I dated this guy, and I always make this joke. I always say like, dang, like we kissed and that turned you gay. Like I always make this joke because we had not a relationship, but we were dating briefly, and then after that, you know, we kind of stopped seeing each other, and then, you know, a couple of like a year or some year and a half, couple of months later, I find out that, you know, he's gay. He's identified as gay or bisexual, I would think. Because till this day he always tells me like, I have a boyfriend, like I'm attracted to this man, but I feel like you're the only woman who turns me on, Yashu. And so like when I used to hear this, I would be like, wait, so are you gay? Are you bisexual? And he would say, I'm gay, but I'm bisexual for you. So even within that, you know, just like identity is so hard to define. And
Hmm.
then where you find out like who you are in that process is also difficult. He didn't realize that he was attracted to me until he's dating this other person, he's in a relationship, he's stable, he's happy with this person, then we reconnected and this person's like, where are these feelings coming from, you know? So it's like I remember that whole process, and until this day we're like really good friends. We're really good friends. We go out, we have lunch and everything, and you know, he always says like, Yashu, I'm your gay best friend, and I always say, of course, like I love you, you know, no matter what. So we have this kind of like fun, you know, feeling friendship between us, but at the same time, I know we've also had moments of this sexual tension. I'm still attracted to him. I think he's very handsome. I'm very attracted to him, but at the same time, I have to respect his boundaries too,
Hmm.
right? So even for people who might be, I'm cis hetero. I think I said it right. I'm cis hetero, right? Even though I identify myself as a single straight female woman, I also have to be mindful that people are on different spaces in their life, and it's okay for you to be attracted to someone who might be bisexual. Having that conversation. I know my best friend, my other best friend, had asked me like, Yashu, would you ever get into a relationship with a bisexual man? So this man wants to marry you, give you everything because he loves who you are, but he also needs his boyfriend. Is that something you'd be open to? And I used to say, yeah, I would be open to that. So it also depends on your comfort, right? How
Well, I
far.
think that kind of delves into polyamory and not as much as into bisexuality. I want to distinguish that just because like not all bisexual people want to have a boyfriend on the side. But
Right.
I'm glad that you were so open to it. And I think that's we just have to know and even if you're not open to it, that's not an issue. I think just knowing what you're comfortable with, and what you want from a relationship is most important. I'll let you finish, Yeshu, and then I'll wrap it up.
Perfect. So I say all of that to say, all of those, you know, little anecdotes. I'm saying all that to say that yes, gender identity is a very, very complex and even at times fluid conversation. And it can get a little overwhelming. And that's why it's important to have resources like the ones we've provided for you. You can scroll up top to check it out so you can be on top of your definitions and know exactly, you know, what is going on and how to be the most respectful and not be afraid to ask, like, what would you prefer being identified as? As a TA, I'm teaching people, I'm talking to people all the time. I have students, and sometimes I'll be in situations and I'm not afraid to say, what would you prefer to be referred to as, or what would you prefer I call you? So having those conversations is completely okay, and it's actually appreciated. And so with that being said, we got a comment here from Snigdha Mishra Katak. You guys rock, and I enjoy watching the conversation thoroughly. Thank you so much for watching and tapping in with us. This is Desi Talk with myself, the Yashu Rao, founder of #HappyYashu, Confidence Lifestyle Coaching. And of course, we got...
Hey, I'm Srishti. Thank you, Snigdha. Snigdha is my guru's sister in Kathak, so I'm really happy that she watches it. She's based in India, so I'm really happy that she can tune in right now and check out what we have to say. I'm really excited. I'm actually kind of sad that this conversation is over because we weren't able to talk about all the things I wanted to talk about. In terms of, like, you know, we are two different, very different people. It's actually kind of interesting and cool that we get to have these conversations. Me as someone that is non-binary and pansexual, and you as someone that identifies as, you know, cis-hetero, I think, and also that we're on two different coasts. You know, you're from DC and you live in Florida and I'm in California. What do those things mean for us? You know, I think a lot of it is that, you know, there is this like narrative where I can be more comfortable with who I am in the Bay Area, even though I'm in a Desi context. Whereas, you know, that's possibly not as much of a space for you. And I also wonder, like, you know, for women, I am, you know, even though I'm non-binary and I'm pansexual, I don't feel the same pressures potentially that men do. And that, or people that are perceived as men or trans. And I think there is a layered aspect to a lot of these things. Like, what does that, you know, then mean to be trans and gay, or trans and, you know, hetero? Like, there's so many layers, and I feel like we were just touching the subject of gender identity. But I'm very happy that we had this conversation. I hope that we've helped you kind of understand what gender identity and sexual orientation, those are all very fluid topics. You can fall in any potential, it's a spectrum, and you know, you could fall anywhere on that spectrum. Just like Yashu said, like, she dated somebody who is gay and identifies as gay and like has, you know, sexual attraction for men, but then is also attracted to Yashu, and that doesn't necessarily mean that he's not gay. So we cannot box people in. And I know that I've had friends where, you know, they identify as lesbian, gay, whatever, and then will still have feelings for the opposite sex or for trans people or for whatever. And that doesn't mean that they can't identify as that as well. So I think the one thing I do want to bring up in this space is that, you know, that these terms are just identifiers. They're just things that you can say to people to help them interact with you. And that's all it does. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're boxed into those things. Because even though I'm identifying as the things that I say, I will say I'm one of the people that potentially doesn't fall into those categories very neatly. I don't necessarily identify with everybody else that identifies with the same things that I identify as. And it is really hard. I understand how hard it can be to come out, to talk about it, to be open about it. It was a struggle for me. I did not understand myself that well for a very long time. So please feel free to reach out to me if you ever do want to talk about it, or to Yashu if you want to have those conversations. I'm happy that we see queer brown people at all. And again, that does not mean that you have to box yourself into being queer. So never feel that way. Subscribe to India.Current, subscribe to the Yashu Rao, subscribe to Problems if you want. And stay tuned for our next, or actually, stay tuned for Yashu's sex education class, which is this Saturday at what time, Yashu?
8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Sex on my mind. Free sex education workshop. We're not just talking about anatomy, physiology, biology, but we also talking about hygiene, masturbation. We're talking about sexual practices, how to turn up the heat in the bedroom. We're going to be talking about healthy communication, healthy relationships, and how to up your Tinder game, right? How to master Tinder and get those relationships, be open about casual relationships, as well as protecting your romantic, intimate moments. So be sure to tap in for this workshop. It's going to be very basic. It ain't going to be overwhelming. It's not going to be an MIT school lecture. I'm going to keep it real simple, but that's just a kind of a really good opening layer to how much more we can dive in deeper with this topic. So be sure to tap in for sure, for sure.
All right, thank you so much. If you have any questions on gender identity and in the Desi context, please feel free to reach out. We're here to make you feel comfortable. Bye,
For sure.
Yashu.
Bye.